Can joint pain predict the weather? Well, that's actually a fact. As hard as it is to believe, when your grandmother tells you that her arthritis flares up in advance of a rainstorm or a change in weather, it actually can happen. It seems that people who have arthritis, have surgical scars or old injuries, can actually tell when weather change is about to take place. And the reason for that is because of baroreceptors. A receptor is actually an organ that is connected to nerves that send information to the brain to give the brain perception about the position of joints, the amount of stretch of muscles, or in the case of ligaments, whether they're being injured and causing pain. So baroreceptors are mechanical receptors. They're actually end organs for nerves that can actually perceive stretch. And we have them in many organs in our body, including our blood vessels, our skin, our muscles, and in our ligaments. And what they do is they tell the brain when there are changes in pressure. Baroreceptors are actually most talked about in the blood vessels of our body. In fact, the great blood vessels, like the aorta. And what they do is they actually help detect blood pressure, and they regulate blood pressure in a homeostatic way. But the baroreceptors that we have in our joints can help us detect small changes in atmospheric pressure. When we have inflammation in the joints or injuries of the joints, these receptors are already sensitized, and so they become even more sensitized when there are changes in barometric pressure, such as when a weather front is coming through and rain is imminent. And so these can sometimes elicit pain and soreness, the kinds of symptoms that your grandmother might tell you about when she's predicting a weather change. What's happening is actually the baroreceptors are responding to low pressure because it's low pressure systems that precede a rainstorm or a sudden change in the weather. And what happens with the lowering of the barometric pressure is that the pressure inside the joint actually causes the joint to expand, and that stretch is what's perceived by the baroreceptor, and that's the message that's being sent to the brain. And because in arthritic joints or injured joints, the baroreceptors are already sensitized, this change in pressure and the stretch will actually accentuate that response and be perceived as pain. It's quite a common phenomenon that patients can actually sense changes in the weather, and it's because of these baroreceptors. But there's no injury that occurs because of the changes in barometric pressure. It's just something that people will feel. But it's also interesting to note that there is some controversy and some disagreement about whether these baroreceptors in joints actually do what we're talking about. But I will say it's so widespread, and having experienced it myself, I feel like there must be some truth to what we're talking about here. If there are people out there who are experiencing exacerbations of their arthritis because of weather changes, there are some things that you can do to help mitigate those symptoms, and they include just taking over-the-counter analgesics or anti-inflammatory medicine or using topical medications. The symptoms are usually mild, and of course they'll pass as the weather passes.